It's a chat, no presentation, no slides, but a valuable conversation that leaves you inspired to find out more. We have a Q&A function on our webinar software, so please do contribute questions, and where we can, we'll get to them and allow you to be part of the conversation as well. I'm delighted also in this episode to let you know that we have been CPD accredited, so you can join, you can get CPD certificates from CPD-me, and we will be sending those out after the live broadcast and after catch-up as well, so you can have those to add to your development. Our plan today is to run for 45 minutes in total, and if we run a little bit later, forgive us, but we'll see how the conversation goes. So that's all my introductions. So let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce Keith Bennett, Richie Moore and Tim Merrill, who will appear on the screen now.
Hello, everybody.
And we'll have Tim and Richie.
Hi all.
And Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hello.
Welcome. I'll just do a quick introductions before we move on. So Keith heads up the drone team at West Midlands Police. Richie does the same in West Midlands Fire Service, and Tim is the National Fire Chiefs Council drone lead. As I said at the beginning of this, we're very much about continuing the conversation from the show, and Tim was at the show and spoke about drones in our Innovation Theatre. So I've asked Tim to share with us, to start us off, about the experience of speaking at the show, the kind of things that he spoke about, and the reaction you had from the audience. So perhaps, Tim, if you could share that with us first.
Well, thanks, Catherine. I think it's important to say if you've not spoken at the show before, then it's probably a daunting experience. I've been speaking for probably the last 10 years on and off at the show, but it's quite an important event for me because we managed to get in a position where you can highlight some of the issues that are facing your sector at the time. And to be honest, if we don't go there and we don't say our bit and we don't allow people to understand what we're doing, how we're basically spending our money and how we're advancing the sector, then somebody else is going to try and do that for you. And we found that quite a few times with a few people on there that sort of almost representing your sector of work, and that's because we're not there, and that's fair enough. So I find it important just to explain to people what we're doing, because quite often we are behind closed doors, and whilst there are a lot of traders in that show, there's an awful lot of people that are going there from different sectors that are linked in with the emergency services, and that can include things like funding bodies as well that are there that are important for us to engage with. I was basically there just to try and explain what we were doing, what was coming down the line for National Fire Chiefs Council and for Fire and Rescue Services, but also to propose a strategy to better integrate both drones and robotic technologies coming on. I think the best thing I got from that, because when you're doing a lot of speaking, it is quite difficult to engage with a large number of people at the same time. It's actually after the event, there's generally a queue of people that want to have a chat with you, and it's those links that are really important to me, and those lead to different avenues and different people that can actually help what you're trying to achieve, and some great ideas as well that come out of that. So it's things like that. I spoke to Saab, of all people, about their drones. I didn't know at all that Saab were making drones. These things are rather high speed for us, but they are still drones. So it opens these little avenues that perhaps I wasn't thinking about.
Fantastic. Well, that's really good to hear. So I'm interested to talk to Keith about his experience, because whilst he didn't speak at the show like you, Tim, and Richie, you weren't able to speak at the show, but for Keith, you've actually been on our televisions talking about, well, in fact, not just talking about, featuring in a 6-part series called Sky Coppers on Channel 4, which I was a big fan of, and I would recommend anybody watches. That's how I first came across you. So could you just tell us a little bit about how on earth that started and what you got out of it in terms of being able to do your job?
Yeah, well, firstly, thank you for the plug. It was a 6-part, 1 hour's 6-part series on Channel 4, Sky Coppers. I wanted to go kind of back a little bit. So 2017, when we started the drone project, it was really important to us to kind of share with the community, with the public, why we were wanting to use drones. It was really important to share with them the reason why, and to get that feedback from the public. So back in 2017, before we actually went operational, we were out there in the public, in the communities, engaging with people and trying to allay some of those fears around drones and privacy, etc. So we were at all sorts of exhibitions, shows, public events, community events, schools, colleges, anywhere where we could go and share where we were to the community, why we were using drones. We were there before we went operational. So then to be offered the opportunity to share and celebrate what we do within drones within the West Midlands was just one that we couldn't pass up on. And it's been hugely successful. Over 1 million people watched the first episode, for example, and the feedback has been absolutely tremendous. So yeah, it was great. I think personally, I was so proud of my team for the way they came across on television, and I think that the real the great thing about it was it showed the human side, the human element of policing, and broke down some of those barriers around the uniforms we were wearing and building those relationships up, and that we're just normal people out there to kind of help.
Okay, that we'll come back to that sort of human point, the sort of proactive use of drones. I wonder, Richie, we could just bring you in terms of there was some fire service elements of Skycoppers. In fact, there was an incident where there was a fire in the heat in the building. You could see the spread and the interaction between the police and fire on the ground. I wonder if you can just sort of share a little bit about being part of the series, and maybe not personally, but also in terms of how you work with West Midlands Police and the sort of benefits that drones bring to you and your service in broad terms.
Yeah, so like the others, thank you for inviting me first of all. So it's really good. So I suppose a little bit like Keith, I go back in time a little bit. So West Mids Fire were actually started using drones a long time ago, along with Lancashire Fire and Rescue team. So we were the pioneers, I suppose, of drones. Oh. Lancashire Fire carried it on, whereas we didn't, for one reason or another. And I suppose in recent times, working quite closely with the police drone team, we've been calling them on for a number of years, where they've been supporting us at incidents, giving us some really good kind of situational awareness. And we felt that actually we probably needed to not rely on the police all the time, because obviously they're busy. Yeah. So we decided as a service that it was the right thing for us to invest in that, and get some drones of ourselves and use them at incidents. I use the word game changing, I suppose, and I don't use that lightly. And I mean, for a fire and rescue service, you know, our job is very different to what Keith's team are doing. We're using it for that situational awareness at incidents. So it's around firefighter safety and things, but it's also about getting a good awareness, so certainly with the thermal imagery. You can imagine how good the thermal imagery is for a fire and rescue service out of fire. So for us, it was about not relying too heavily on the police anymore. But what I would say is now I'd like to think that we sort of complement each other. So Keith's team do still come and support us at fires, but we also go and support them with missing persons and things like that when their teams are a little bit busy. So we've got a good working relationship probably now, I'd say, over the last 3 years that we're continuing to build on.
Okay. And Tim, with your National Fire Chief's hat on, is what Keith and Richie have talked about in terms of that relationship something quite common that you see in other parts of the country?
Yeah, there's a real mix of teams, to be honest, and you'll have a sort of lead agency. You know, those are ones that have got to go and get the operational authorization to fly. But actually, quite often they're dual teams, and they're made up of both fire and police, and we operate like that quite recently, up to quite recently as well in Lancashire. But from a national perspective, the police forces have more teams than we have. We've got 25, and I think they're nigh on full up. I think now Keith, I know better than me. But but it's very much dependent on the local circumstances, local governance as well, which is important. But also we've got this duty to collaborate as well, which is a legal duty. So drones is that perfect area where we can collaborate really well, because if you can put that eye in the sky, it's very dependent on whether or not it is there and in place and looking at the right object. And as we work fairly closely together anyway, it's not a great leap for Keith to go and fly at a fire, and it's not a great leap for Richie to go and fly at missing persons, because you're providing that level of information to incident commanders. So it's fairly normal, to be honest. So quite a lot of the teams start off as a joint proposition because of the collaboration piece, Catherine.
Yes. And is some of that driven by cost? Because the investment in the equipment presumably is quite something for a fund.
Well, to be honest, the investment in the equipment's important, but I think a lot of people underestimate the staff investment. A typical drone now, a really good drone will cost you maybe £8,000.
Right.
But actually, if you're putting out a 24/7 capability, then you are spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on the staff costs alone, plus the training, plus the travel, plus the kit. So actually, most of the money's in staff, and that is where the collaboration is important.
Right. I think, Keith, am I right in thinking that you have to have a certain level of training to fly a drone, and that there's certain qualifications that you need to be able to?
Yes. So all of our pilots, we fly within the specific category.
Right.
All of our pilots are trained to GVC standard, which is a legal requirement. However, I'm quite cruel. I keep that GVC certificate to myself when they pass their legal requirement, and I keep them back for a week, and we put them through all the kind of challenges that they'll expect day to day. So we'll mentor them through a week of operational training, where they will they'll go out on patrol, on operations with a really experienced pilot, and we'll put them through their paces before we let them out.
Okay, so let's talk about types of incidents then. So we've had mention of missing persons, of fires. Richie, in terms of the incidents that you're using them for within West Mids Fire, is it purely to give you that situational awareness on the fire and to help with firefighter safety, or is there something broader that you can talk to us about in terms of how you're using them?
Yeah, so we use it for all of that. There's not many incidents that a drone doesn't attend now, so it'd even be closing incidents down and things. So what we can do is, certainly if you're looking at things like hotspots and that, what we're doing now is sending a drone up, taking a recording. I know it's only a snapshot in time, but using the thermal cameras, we can actually record if there's hotspots within the building. So when we're actually leaving that building now and passing it back to the responsible person, we've got a record of when we left it there, or how we left it, which is good for us. It's just a good thing to do. I suppose multi-agency. So it's Jessup in the sky is something that we've referred to a few times. It's not been underwritten yet, but it is sort of there. It's like an unknown thing. So we train quite closely with Keith's team. So we put training days on. We'll go and train with them. They'll come to the firehouses to learn a little bit more around the thermals and that. And I suppose a significant incident that we went to probably have just come up for 12 months ago now is the Babs Mill tragedy, where unfortunately the 4 young boys died in the lake that was in the West Midlands area. So I don't want to dwell on the incident at all, really, but what I want to do is just talk about how we work together collaboratively as drone teams.
Yeah,
so,
really.
Yeah, I happened to be the pilot that day for West Mids Fire. I got to the incident, put our drone up, and we were just given a bit of situational awareness over the lake. One of Keith's team then turned up. We had a quick chat. We decided we put some protocols in place. We had 2 drones flying fairly closely together with certain parameters in place, so it was safe. And what that allowed us to do, it allowed us to give a bit of situational awareness to the crews that were in the water or on the boats. It allowed us to continue that bit of search, but we were doing it collaboratively. And then in the end, we had a further drone. So we actually had 3 drones in the sky at one point. It was all done very safely, all coordinated.
Yeah.
We then decided from a fire perspective that, we're going to leave this to the police now, because I was needed actually on the incident ground to do command kind of duties. My skills were called for there. So Keith's team then took over the drone kind of element of that incident. So, you know, that was one of the incidents, but from a national perspective, Tim's Fire and Rescue Service, so Lancashire Fire and Rescue Service, have got an underwater drone.
Okay.
And what we did was we actually called on that drone through National Resilience. That drone was then blue lighted down to West Midlands area, and we were able to use that drone in the water to try and continue that search.
Okay. So let me pause you there. So in terms of, just to explain to people watching who may not understand what you've just talked about in terms of national resilience, Tim, could you just explain how that works and how you were able to do that interaction that Richie's just talked about, just to help people understand the detail of this?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of detail to it. Well, essentially speaking, national resilience is a part of the Fire and Rescue Services nationally. It's funded via Home Office into National Fire Chiefs Council. And then we've a lead authority, which is Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service, that delivers the national resilience capability. Within that capability, we're able to provide add-ons, and one of them is a national capability for drones. And there's several fire and rescue services on that national capability. And what we've done just this year is switch that round from just providing types of drones to providing types of capability. So now we've got the indoor drones, the underwater drones, mapping drones, and then your standard drone as well if you haven't got one, or if you need multiple assets. Basically, you'll put the normal from fire and rescue control, from any control, police control, into national resilience fire control, and they will mobilise the nearest asset of that capability type. Okay.
And so that asset that Richard talked about was coming from Lancashire. So you owned that underwater drone, did you, in Lancashire?
Yeah, so we have a deep trekker submersible with multi-imaging sonar on it. So
So when that turned up in Birmingham, Richie, who knew how to operate? Did you get somebody with it? Did somebody come with it who knew how to operate it?
Yeah, absolutely. So it comes with a team. So that's how national resilience works. Yeah.
Excellent. And in terms of improving the outcomes from the incident, having that capability both in the sky and under the water, is that the game changer that you were talking about earlier? Does that make the difference?
I wouldn't say on that particular incident, no, but I think generally, certainly with fires and things, it absolutely is. I know Keith will probably come in now and talk about a little bit around how the police use drones, but certainly from a fire and rescue service, I think Tim would agree that, the fact that now we've got pictures from the sky, basically giving us a good overview of a significant incident ground sometimes. I know, like the wildfires that we don't tend to get down here in the Birmingham area, or certainly in the West Mids area, but obviously where Tim is, obviously they have them all the time. So, I'll let them talk about that a little bit.
Okay. Before we do that, can I just pick up a question that I can see coming up here, which is quite popular, which helps us with that sort of national resilience that we've just been talking about. People are talking about it in the context of the Local Resilience Forum. So the question is around, is there a national register of licensed LRF, so Local Resilience Forum drones or UAV capabilities? So it suggests to me that maybe it is within Resilience Direct when you're calling on incidents, but I'm not sure. Do any of you want to comment on that?
I'll pick that up, Catherine. Local resilience forums, so they're defined, certainly England and Wales, through the Civil Contingencies Act. So they're set up, and it's normally the police in a local authority that are the lead agency for the Local Resilience Forum. Well, that brings together all of what we call Category 1 and 2 responders, as well as voluntary agencies. It is for each Local Resilience Forum to have an asset register if they want to have one. Right. Obviously, most, if not all, of the police forces have got drones, so that's sort of a gimme. And then majority of fire and rescue services have drones as well. So even if you've not got a police drone, you've probably got a fire and rescue drone. So we've already got that immediate asset, and that I think it's important for people to understand from an emergency point of view. We are slightly different the way we fly, and also the access that we have immediately to the incident is really important. So it's less about having an asset register for drones. It's more about how do you share the imagery that's already there. Because we normally don't need a load more drones. In fact, we definitely don't want to load more drones in the area because that disrupts what we're trying to do. I think the important thing is actually how do you integrate the imagery coming from Keith's drone or Richie's drone back into the local resilience forum. I think that's the better sort of question, really.
Are you talking there about sort of a contemporaneous? So if Keith's got his drone and Richie's got his drone, and they're both providing feeds back to the person on the ground, and then back to control, but their control rooms are separate. So
yeah,
are you talking about them all simultaneously being able to see
a local resilience forum will quite often have a gold or silver command. So it's about how you get your feeds into that command position for everyone to see it that needs to see it, all the category 1, 2 responders that are in place. So that's the live streaming to remote, but also you've got live streaming to a local area. So quite a lot of times, if it's an incident that requires a local resilience forum stand up, then we will probably have a command unit there anyway, and the feeds will be coming into a command unit similar to Keith. Really, if they want to stand up an area in one of their divisional commands and just say, right, that is now our silver room or tactical, then actually we're going to put the imagery into tactical. So we'll just try and make sure the imagery is going to the right people at the right time. Yeah,
Keith, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there's been a question around that, actually, around the cellular feed as well. And
yes, that.
We do rely on the cellular feed, and it's very simple. We can send a link to anybody, like an encrypted link. So if it's somebody else that we want to see that feed, we'll just send that, and that works really well.
Right. And in terms of the technology, the software side of things, is it able to allow the control room to see all of those things at the same time? Is it basically just all on different screens? I mean, is it over layer? Are we talking about layering of GIS type data? What are we talking about here?
We actually used to use Teams. So instead of feeding from the camera on your laptop, for example, it's from the camera from the actual drone itself.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. So we've talked about different types of incidents, talked about situational awareness, firefighter safety. I'm interested in drones. Tim, you use the phrase "drones for good" a lot, and I wonder, does that cover off the kind of thing that Keith talks about in Skycoppers, which is around that the proactive thing, the engagement thing, the how do you use drones to bring young people in to kind of go, oh, actually the police are okay. I mean, Is that you spending a lot of your time on that? The drones?
We don't spend an awful lot of time on that. We probably could do a little bit more, but I mean, however, you'll find that I mean, Keith's team will be really busy anyway. So the teams tend to be really busy. So that prevention activity, we've got teams that do prevention activity and engagement, and it's like most school kids will see fire and rescue service in their schoolroom twice in their lifetime. So it's a case of, is that the best use for those assets at the moment? Because we haven't got a massive amount of those assets at the time. That's probably not fantastic use of the assets. But it doesn't mean we can't, and it doesn't mean we shouldn't. From a proactive point of view of how do people perceive the use of drones in the UK, there's quite a lot of work out there getting done already by Future Flight and Transport Catapult as well, just looking at those public perception surveys. And as you probably understand, people actually don't want a pizza getting delivered next door with a drone, but they do very much want to see a burglar getting caught that might be there, or actually if we're using those images to save lives, then that's always going to get really good public perception. But actually the sort of I suppose in a way that more making money from the use of drones is a slightly different aspect. And there are people in Department of Transport looking into that quite closely, because the future flight's incredibly important for the UK. It's a big industry.
All right. Just to finish off that proactive point before we move on to the constraints, which is what we're going to talk about next. So Keith, you were quite keen that they were used as a kind of engagement thing. I remember there's something about, after you'd used them, like the kids would come up and have a look. Does that happen, or is that just for the telly?
No, it definitely does happen. Certainly within the West Mids community, we try and share and celebrate as much as we can, and that does involve engaging with school groups, scouts, and any youth groups. Is really important to us, because it's really important to kind of break those barriers down and build those relationships up. So I learned years ago when I was a dog handler, but by taking a dog into a school actually acts as a really great hook for the young people to come and actually speak with you. and to break that barrier down and break the uniform down, so that they go home at the end of the night and said, you know what, I met the police today, I met Keith, I met his dog, etc. And you know what, he's just a normal person. So I learned really early on in my career. So I tried it with drones a few years ago, and it's exactly the same. Yeah. So where groups are a little don't really want to talk to the police, as soon as you get a piece of kit out, a piece of technology, and start showing their friends, they soon group around, and that's what that youth engagement is really, really important to us. And it also allows us to kind of inspire the next generation of police officers and also aviators. So to be able to champion the sector in those schools, colleges, universities is really important to us.
Right, that's really interesting to get those two different perspectives on that. Okay, so let's move on to constraints. So we mentioned about skills and training and the need for certification, but we've also got the Civil Aviation Authority as a kind of regulatory space in which you work. I wonder, in terms of constraints, is the current setup where the Civil Aviation Authority regulates this airspace, how can you, hindering you? Do you see it needing to change in the future? Richard, do you want to just start with that one?
Well, to answer your question, yes, it does need to change. That's simple, really. I think for us at the moment, our vision, I think we're going to talk about the future. I won't talk about that right now, but yeah, it does stop us doing a lot of things, I suppose. Certainly.
To spell out what the constraints are then in terms of your operational day-to-day activity. It's a little bit. Is it in terms of time spent, how high you can go, what time of day, about weather?
So I think for us as a fire and rescue service, we don't particularly need to go above the height. If we do, then there's something wrong, if I'm honest. I think sometimes we perhaps need to go a little bit further, but then have we set up where we're taking off from in the wrong place? Probably is what we're doing wrong, I would say. So it's about making sure that we have that situational awareness before we set up to make sure that we can cover the whole of the incident ground. So I think, like I said before, Tim probably, where they are doing the wildfires and things, they cover massive areas, and they're probably using multiple drones. I don't know, because I haven't been up there to see them doing it, but I can only imagine that's what they'd be, because otherwise they'd be going beyond visual line of sight, I would imagine. We do have some big parks around here, and we are probably on the border of flying outside of the regulations now and again. We can push the boundaries because we can, for an operational sort of reason, but the question would be, why would we? So I think, for us at the moment, it doesn't particularly affect us right now, this moment in time, but for future, it definitely is going to affect what we would like, or certainly what my vision would be for drones in the West Midlands in the future.
Okay, and are there differences? So Tim, Keith and Richard are working in a pretty urban environment, whereas you up in Lancashire are very different in terms of your geography. So do you find the constraints the same as Richard's expressed, or are they quite different from your point of view?
Yeah, I think it's important just to set out from a fire and rescue service point of view. Most incidents are static incidents, so actually the requirement to go beyond visual line of sight isn't always there. Totally different for Keith, and certainly the future look for Keith are very different for fire and rescue service. But we do have these wide area incidents, so it might be flooding, it might be wildfire, and if we were to follow the guidance, and actually in order to achieve what we need to achieve, we'll be putting firefighters at risk. In order to do that, so we won't put firefighters at risk, but we do have an agreement with the CAA, and it's an odd thing at the moment. I might just need to explain that why I'm saying that, but it's a little bit odd, the relationship we have at the moment, because both the police and the fire service are state aircraft. So actually, we don't legally have to follow an awful lot of the regulations that are put down by the CAA. But we have both been invited to comply with them, because when we moved from some of the EU legislation into UK legislation a couple of years ago, we actually adopted a lot of the EASA, which is the European Civil Aviation Authority version. We actually adopted a lot, and it brought us under state aircraft. Now, prior to that, both ourselves and the police had emergency service exemptions, so we could fly beyond visual line of sight. We could fly higher if we needed to, and that's for life or limb instance. So we now have that agreement from a fire and rescue point of view that we can fly further and higher if we need to. But like Richie says, you need a good rationale to be able to do that, because it is more dangerous. It is certainly not the most dangerous thing we do in the fire service, though, without a doubt. And Keith, exactly the same. That isn't the most dangerous thing that we do by a long way. But if we don't have to do it, we shouldn't be doing it. So that rationale is really important. And there's another few things in there. I mean, I suppose in a way that the CAA are regulators. They don't set the legislation. So the legislation is set by either the Home Office or the Department for Transport for us. And at the moment, we don't have people that are overseeing state aircraft. So that's the oddity. So we're a little bit in limbo in there. So we are invited to comply with the CAA regulations only because we don't have anyone else that sits above us regulating us. Yeah. So we are a real oddity in the UK, in the world actually, from that point of view. If you're in France, your state aircraft, you've got very different rules.
Okay, all right, that's interesting on the regulations point of view. On the sort of constraints in terms of the technology, perhaps Keith, if you pick this one up, around battery limitations, weather, night vision, the sort of thermal imaging as things, are there constraints at the moment that kind of limit how you can operate? In terms of
if you asked me that a few years ago, Catherine, I'd have said yes, but actually now not.
Yeah.
When you talk about batteries, our vehicles have inverters, so we can charge our batteries on the go. We take enough out to be able to stay out and not have to keep on coming back to charge batteries.
Yeah.
So, a couple of years ago, you'd only get 20 minutes out of a battery. You're now getting 40 to 50 minutes, and we actually carry enough resources with us to enable us to stay out for the whole day.
Right.
Weather, again, the newer technology can stay out in inclement weather a lot more than some of the older aircraft. So no, it is. I think the technology is there. Regulation just needs to catch up, because the technology can do far more. But we have those constraints. The police, the majority of police force drone teams fly within a specific category under a PDRA-01 from the CAA. And we comply with all those existing regulations and abide by the conditions and limitations set out in that risk assessment. And it's really important to us to kind of set that really good demonstration to the public, because how can we say to people, you shouldn't be flying in these ways and fly like that ourselves? So it's really important we stick to the regs and demonstrate that good practice. Okay,
all right, that's very clear. I just want to go to our questions. Somebody has asked here about, do you ever see a situation where, it says in a rural environment, I don't know whether rural or urban, where a drone could arrive before the ground units in order to provide early situation awareness to a commander or resources en route? Is that reality, or does that happen now? I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
Who'd like to take that?
It doesn't happen now. It will be happening soon.
Right.
So
what do you need to make it happen?
Technology's there, regulation.
Right.
And to be honest, there's another thing. There's that public perception thing in the background as well. If we get this wrong and the public aren't happy with what we're doing, then actually that can quickly escalate to a point where we're not even flying drones anymore. So we do have to be really, really careful from a few angles, from a privacy, from noise, and all these things that are there at the moment. But no one at the moment in the UK is doing that. Norfolk police are going to be trialling that fairly soon.
Mm-hmm.
But also we're going to be looking at trials next year from a fire and rescue point of view as well. I mean, we're quite fortunate from a fire and rescue point of view. We have our assets and our resources are always deployed according to risk, as opposed to according to the amount of incidents that we're getting in. So actually, you've got a fire station in every village pretty much in the UK, and we've got command and control feeds into all those areas. So for us, from a point of view, you can make a phone call, Catherine, today, and we know where you are within 6 to 8 meters when you hit that 999 button.
Yeah.
So we already know your lat and long from where you make the phone call, and I know there's a question on there about what 3 words as well, and that is just
I was going to say that links quite nicely, doesn't it?
That's just an equation across, and that is possible. So what we then want to do is a drone in a box provider, a DIB, and there's plenty out there. And one of those providers to be linked into our fire station. So when we give a call sign to that drone, that drone then initiates its sort of takeoff response, which isn't just takeoff. It'll look at meteorological conditions, those kind of things before it moves, and then it will move into a direction. These aren't unusual, so there's probably 4 or 5 of these flying over Bristol at the moment. But from a very different point of view, these aren't first responders. But that drone as a first responder, both ourselves and the National Police Chief's colleagues are working towards that, and we will be trialling next year. So is it possible? Absolutely. The viability of it is a very different thing altogether, though, because I think rural is quite important, because you're not a lot of CCTV in rural areas, whereas you do in urban areas. So actually the payoff's slightly different.
Yeah.
But if, for example, there was a multi-agency incident in a village somewhere, and we sent a drone fairly early on, it would arrive there easily before any responders. So that would be really useful.
Okay.
And providing that back would be useful. But there's a load of things to build on the back of that, from how resilient are these units at the moment. And when you talked about any of the problems we might and the issues we might have, the resilience of the unit is really important. I mean, we're quite happy with the sort of workhorses that we probably all fly now between ourselves and the police. Actually, it would be better if they got much better wind speed. It would be better if they could take a bit more punishment, really, from the elements.
We're starting to stray into our future questions, so I'm going to pause you there. I just want to ask Keith and Richie, in terms of West Midlands, the interaction between your 2 services, about those discussions and the kind of things that Tim's just mentioned there about the issues and constraints and future things. Do you sit down and have those discussions at a strategic level? Are your chiefs doing that? Are you doing it within your LRF? You've got combined authority in the West Midlands. Where do those discussions take place?
Probably, I would imagine, sorry, Richie, conversations occur between the NPCC, which is the National Police Chief Council, and what Tim said with the National Fire Service Chiefs Council. I know the NPCC drone portfolio are really keen to push that innovation, and they're supporting their Eagle X project, which is kind of a project to push the boundaries of innovation and to enhance police drone operations. But obviously we'll share that with the fire brigade, and I'm sure they will with us. And it's about sharing that good practice, so that we're not doing the same thing or trialing the same thing, so that we keep those conversations open, kind of maximise the efficiency of emergency service drone capability.
But you're talking at a national level. Richie, what happens at West Mids level? Where do you have those chats to sort of work out what you want to do?
Myself and Keith, basically, and
sat in the pub having a chat.
And Keith's inspector, Mark. So we will sit in a room and we will have those local discussions. We've got and not forgetting as well, we've also got in West Mids, ambulance are also part of our drone. So we've got an MOU, so memorandum of understanding, in West Midlands, that enables the 3 services to work collaboratively, but also use each other's equipment and things like that when it needs. So we're constantly having those conversations, but it's also about making sure that we train together, and that. So it's not just about technology; it's about making sure that when we are actually on the incident ground, trying to provide the footage, that we're able to do it effectively and in the best possible way.
And you're talking about training and exercising and sort of learning from that and pulling it back into the way that you operate, and that sort of cycle round. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I'd like to think that we've taught Keith's team a little bit about what to look at from a thermal image kind of perspective. However, they've taught us a lot of stuff around tactics and just different things that we probably wouldn't do. But what it's actually done now is actually helping our pilots fly better at incidents, so they're more aware of what they're doing.
that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's just about that collaborative working. But like you say, ambulance are also involved. So West Midlands Ambulance are part of that group.
Mm-hmm.
But their model is slightly different to ours, which probably doesn't allow them to come and train quite so often because of their drones are actually within their heart teams. So yeah, they find it a little bit more difficult, but they are part of the discussions.
Okay. Well, maybe we should have invited them to join our webinar. We should have had the all three of you from the West Midlands. Just want to pick up on a couple of points before we draw to a close. One is around flying inside buildings. Are we seeing drones going inside buildings now and being helpful?
Yeah, I think the last training we did with fire was actually searching for people in buildings with drones. It enhances your skills as a pilot without a shadow of a doubt. It's far different flying inside buildings to flying outside, far more obstacles. But yeah, and actually when people talk about why are you using drones instead of conventional aircraft like helicopters? Well, helicopters can't go inside buildings, and that's a really important piece around drones and why we use them, because actually at the minute we can actually do more than the helicopter in those situations, although the helicopter is vital to us, and I can't see it disappearing in the short term.
Yeah.
Actually, it can't do a lot of the things that we can do.
Okay, so drones inside buildings are a big tick for those. What about AI, artificial intelligence? Is there any kind of developments here where it's kind of, I don't know, learning more from loads of data that someone's churned through to make them more intelligent? Is that a red herring? Anything in that space?
So, I mean, nationally, so the join up and the purpose of having a strategy is ensuring that UK PLC is working together, and we've got a new robotics centre up in Edinburgh now. We've got a new AI centre going at Cambridge, and actually at the end of the day, these are tools, but without being clever with the imagery, they're not a very good tool. It's all about the imagery at the end of the day and what we do with that. So if we take that and create maps, well, that's good. We can do that now. What we find tricky is some of the imagery that we are capturing is one of a kind. It's not open source, and a lot of the AI and a lot of the machine learning going on is basically taking stuff from open source. So it's almost like when you see those little capture things that run when you're trying to log into a site, it's almost like they're taking those as open source images and allowing you to tell them which one is which type of image. But the stuff that we take imagery from, and Keith and Richie, that isn't out there. So actually when we look at, okay, so how do we detect a fire? And we've talked a little bit about drone as a first responder. So if we send a drone now, rather than someone staring at a screen, can it detect a fire on its own? And at the moment it can't. So we're working with Sheffield Uni at the moment to be able to achieve that. There are other people out there working on the same stuff as well, right across the world, from a wildfire perspective. But actually, if you ask them, okay, show me that in thermal imagery, well, because there isn't a lot of thermal imagery out there from fires, actually we're holding that data so we can do stuff with that. So it's about how we use that. But I mean, that's just one aspect. That's machine learning part of the AI. There's other things out there. So we look at underwater drones, for example. How do we detect using sonar a person underwater? And again, it's about who's got all that imagery. It's not out there. So we have to create that data and then cleverly use that data. And that's why we need to link in with the likes of the AI Centre to make sure that going forward, we are providing the imagery, but we're going to get a payback from that. And what emergency services are really bad at is saying, yeah, we can do this. Here's all our information. And actually, that is our information, and that's our intellectual property going with it as well. And we need to be a little bit more cute with what we do with things going forward.
All right, that's a very interesting point to end us on. It sounds to me like it could actually be a webinar in its own right, AI and drones. Maybe we'll do that next time. I'm going to have to draw us to a close. It's been a fascinating insight into the drone world of West Midlands with a national perspective from you, Tim. I just want to do a quick summary before we leave. which is to say that I think it seems to me that drones are business as usual across the country through the blue lights. But actually where the really interesting stuff is now, where do you go next with it? What's the innovation look like? How do you create a regulatory space that allows you to do the jobs that you want to do? The technology is pretty solid, but could improve in some areas. Around the AI is interesting, going into buildings. It sounds to me like, in terms of being a career within a role within your services, a real area to come in and specialise in and perhaps grow your teams. But of course that takes money, and your authorities will need to agree that. So lots of things to think about, and really interesting discussion. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish, or are you happy for me to wrap up there? You only have
I think from this, when we talk about drones, at the moment we're just talking about small drones, and there are some very big drones out there now, and that brings a completely different capability. So we're already working as part of Future Flight now, and we'll be demonstrating in May. We'll be swarming aircraft. These are 10-metre wingspan aircraft. They're not small things. So we'll be setting them in a swarm to detect fire, which is the work with Sheffield again. But Bristol Uni have got the swarming technology they're going to use, and Winrace is another UK firm, have got these fantastic ultra assets that will allow us to carry fire retardant as well. So not only will they be able to detect fire, they will be dropping retardant on fire, and that's where we're going, and we're going there really quickly. And beyond that, if you call them drones, are the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft as well. eVTOLs, people call them air taxis. That's going to be a dramatic difference to our response in both ways. In responding to an incident involving one of those will be very interesting given the size of battery, but also what does that bring to us? How can we move our specialist assets? When Richie talked about taking an underwater drone, which is a specialist asset, how can we get that from A to B really quickly? Yeah. And all of a sudden, there is a route there.
Okay, well, it sounds to me like the topic for a future webinar. So maybe we'll bring you all back and we'll discuss it in more detail. In which case, that just leads me to thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon and being part of the webinar. To remind people watching that the webinar will be available on Catch Up via the website where you registered. Any notes for the webinar will be there as well. I put in a few links, Twitter feeds and so forth for the people speaking here. And also to ask you to sign up for our next webinar, which is next Thursday on electric vehicles. And all information is on our website, motorservicestimes.com. We will be sending you CPD emails as well in the next week or so. So thank you to Tim, to Richie, to Keith for a fascinating discussion. We may be together again next year if we can bring another webinar together. That would be fantastic. But thank you. Thank you very much for watching.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.